Hi,
How are you?
I'm great. Welcome, Robert Winters,
How are you?
the information person for Cambridge City Council.
That's me. I'm the switchboard operator for the People's Republic of Cambridge. Right.
And you do the Cambridge Civic Journal.
I have been doing the Cambridge Civic Journal now since 1997, so that's 16, going on 16 years.
Wow.
So I always call it a website. I don't call it a blog, but to those who call it a blog, they say mine's probably the first civic blog in the universe.
In the universe.
Yes.
And you keep track of all the candidates for the city council.
Well, I mean that's kind
and
of
a lot of the activities of the council.
Well, it's activity of civic affairs. I always try and make a distinction between civics and politics.
Uh-huh.
I like to think that most of what I do is civics, so it's just sort of what's going on generally all around the city, and that includes what happens up amongst elected officials
Mm-hmm.
at city council or at school committee to a lesser degree, planning board meetings, and just generally. I also like to provide a certain amount of history, only because it's something I'm interested in. Basically, I do what I want to do. but every 2 years, when it's municipal election season, since I have a kind of a massive archive of materials from which I can work, and a fair amount of familiarity with all the candidates, and I can also help some of the candidates behind the scenes with data. I provide databases and whatever for candidates. Actually, I provided those to about 16 candidates this morning.
16 candidates.
16 candidates so far.
What sort of information did you provide?
Well, the thing is that any candidate is entitled to a registered voter database, but they don't always have a person who kind of knows how to manage the data to make it available. So I kind of put it in a really good user-friendly format, and I join it with information from the street listings as well as from anywhere up to about 25 past elections to get voter histories of all the voters. I've shortened it to about 17 elections this time to make it a little more workable. But many candidates, I think the experience...
That's 34 years.
No, because the thing is I'm including municipal elections, but there's also a few primaries. I have the most recent June 25th Senate election, special Senate election. So candidates, rather than broadcast their message or try and send a mailing out to every single person in the city, which would be an incredible waste of money, they tend to target their campaigns to most likely voters, or voters in particular parts of the cities, or people who vote in municipal elections and do so reliably. So this way they can make best use of their available resources. So I do my best to sort of make as much of that available to as many candidates, as I choose. As I choose, yes. Yeah.
And so what sort of stuff is on your website?
Well, again, there's what I do during the election season, which is just to provide initially, maintain the list of who the probable candidates are going to be. But now that's settled because the deadline for submitting nomination signatures was July 31st.
Uh-huh.
So it's now settled into unless somebody pulls out, which they have until I think August 16th to withdraw, but I don't think anybody's going to withdraw. So we should have 25 city council candidates and 9 school committee candidates that are all pretty much, they're settled. All of them have been certified by the election commission except for a few that were turned in their signatures at the deadline. But the election commission is actually meeting at 5:30 today, and they will, likelihood officially certify the remaining candidates, so that then we'll have 25 and 9. And 25 is a pretty large field for the city council race.
Sure sounds like it.
Yeah, I mean,
for 9 seats.
Back when I was foolish enough to be a candidate myself in 1993, there were 29 candidates that year.
Huh.
Yeah, there were 3 vacancies. If I remember correctly, I believe there were 3 vacancies. So it brought out a lot of candidates, brought out a lot of voters. There were 29 candidates. Typical elections since then, I think you've seen some where there were as few as 15 city council candidates. Typically it's more like 18, 19, 20 and around there. When I first was paying attention years ago, you might see 22, 23, but
Wow.
29 would be high. 25 is on the high side.
How many are seriously running? I mean, not that they're not running, but
Well, of
have a
course,
serious chance.
without naming names,
Without-
well, certainly there are 7 of those 25 are incumbents. All of them have a good chance of being elected, not a guarantee.
Re-elected, yeah.
But in addition to those, there are, I would say, at least 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe about 7 or 8 candidates of the remaining ones who I think could actually be really viable candidates. I mean, technically they're all viable candidates, but some are going to have to work really, really hard to get their name out and try and turn their campaign into something viable. So, but you know, and it's a little tighter on the school committee. There's only 9. There's 6 to elect, and only 9 candidates for those 6 seats. So, but there are 2 vacancies. So, you know, we will probably have 4 incumbents reelected, but then there'll be 2 out of the remaining 5 who will be elected. So just by being a candidate, you have a 40% chance of being elected, which is pretty good. So it's a lot, you know, I think it's a little more difficult to just sort of come out of nowhere as a candidate in the city council race and actually hope to get elected. But, you know, there are familiar faces like Sam Seidel, who has been a city councilor in the past, who's running, hoping to pick up a seat. Mark McGovern is an incumbent school committee member who's now going to be running for city council, so he has a lot of name recognition. There are several other candidates who have run before, so they have some name recognition. And there are some candidates who are really coming out of nowhere, but you know, may actually be viable just because, you know, they have resources and they got the vim and vigor, as John F. Kennedy used to say. Lots of vigor.
What it takes is vigor to get elected.
They got a lot of vigor. Yeah.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
So, what do you think are the issues that they need to resolve when they get elected?
Well, you know what? I always like to break the hearts of young candidates who are saying, "I'm going to stress this issue and that issue," and I say something which is not entirely true, but it is somewhat true, which is that voters don't care about issues. It's not totally true, but honestly, I think in municipal elections, though issues matter, most voters are probably voting for representation. In other words, there's all this routine stuff that a city councilor or a school committee person has to do that you as an individual don't want to do, so you want your representative to be there to do it for you. And what that means is that people want to elect people who are like them, who are, you know, so in other words...
You want somebody you can trust to do what you would otherwise do.
Well, you know, it's really up to the voter. So if you're, you know, if you live in a particular neighborhood, maybe your sense of who I can trust is the person who lives in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
Right? If other people tend to think along ethnic lines, so you may vote for somebody who shares an ethnic heritage with you. Some people will vote along gender lines, right, or sexual orientation lines. And you know, it's every individual voter's choice as to what they want to value in terms of what constitutes representativeness for them. So I think, you know, so that especially in a proportional representation type elections, what you have is a situation where there are kind of elections within the election, right? I mean, if there's an electorate of people, let's just say, for example, everybody voted by neighborhood. So you might have 3 or 4 candidates running out of East Cambridge, you know, and they were competing to see who will be the 1 or 2 representatives from East Cambridge. They're not necessarily then competing against the people, even though they're on the same ballot. They're not really competing against somebody from North Cambridge, because the East Cambridge person, if everybody voted by neighborhood, the East Cambridge people would never vote for the North Cambridge person, and the North Cambridge would never vote for the East. That's of course not how it really works.
Yeah.
But there are people who are going to vote within their tribe, you know, however they choose to define it. And as well they should. People want their representativeness. You know, so who's going to represent me? Who looks like me? Who hangs with me? Who went to the same school as me?
Well,
right?
but hopefully one of the reasons for their closeness is that they share certain views about how things should go.
About issues. But the thing is that if you look at it, I mean, it's not like it was back before 1994, when rent control was sort of the defining issue of the
That was
day.
a big issue, yeah.
Yeah, so there, I think it's probably fair to say that there were two tribes in Cambridge. There were those who liked rent control and those who didn't like rent control. And you voted within your tribe that way. Rent control was taken off the table in 94 and the subsequent years. So since then, people have defined their notions of representativeness in different ways. Some people do it just by the easiest thing of all, is what do I look like, right? Say, oh, I'm a guy, you know, or I'm a white guy, or a black man, or a gay woman, or somebody who speaks Spanish, or somebody who went to MIT.
I'm sure these things happen, but it makes me somewhat uncomfortable.
I know, but the thing is that you have to respect what the voters' wishes are, and if that's their notion of representativeness, then that's how it is. Now, there are issues. I don't want to minimize that. I mean, you know, and again, everybody's got their own lens through which they see the world. So, as I see it today, I see some big issues in terms of what the future of Central Square will be. Right? There are some truths and there are some fictions out there about some people claiming Central Square is about to get turned into, you know, it's going to be faced with a tsunami of development where there's going to be 300-foot buildings marching down Mass Ave. Well, that's not going to happen.
What do you mean, not going to happen
Well,
tomorrow?
Anytime soon, really.
But some of it will.
Some new construction may happen and should happen. I'm looking right now over at the Quest Diagnostic Building, which is a little one-story building at Lafayette Square, which honestly makes no sense at all. There really should be something a little more substantial there, I think, you know, for a significant location like this. So there will be probably some development that will happen Central Square, down around Lafayette Square, you know, Quest Diagnostic Properties, where Alex Twining recently bought. And Twining Properties bought a lot of properties, so there'll probably be something happening here. Probably not as much as some people may fear, but some things will probably happen here within the next 5 years.
And you talk about Forest City.
Forest City.
What development are they going to be involved in?
Well,
in the short
that's
term?
kind of settled now. There was 300 Mass Ave, where what people refer to as the All Asia Block. That's you know, it's a place close to where Random Hall, the old what's called Cambridgeport Saloon was, which has been shuttered for years. Coming up to Blanche Street, there was a controversial.
In front of the supermarket.
The supermarket, the Star Market, is on the second floor within the University Park development, but the zoning petition basically extended the University Park, which is really called the Cambridgeport Redevelopment. Actually, CRDD, whatever that stands for, extended up to Massachusetts Avenue, and in it they did some adjustments of the height, so there should be about a building of a comparable scale to the Necco building will appear there when you include all the mechanicals. So that's basically, the zoning's done. There's tonight at the planning board, there's a meeting where they're doing the last of two meetings, presumably the last of two meetings, having to do with design of the building, and hopefully it'll get tweaked a little bit so it'll look a little better than the first pass that we saw. But you know, other than that, it's still sort of a good plan, and so that's going to happen no matter what. So I think everybody kind of understands that.
What role did the council have in that development?
They played a role in that it required a change in the zoning, and the zoning is part of an ordinance, and it's the city council passes ordinances. So that required, I believe, 6 votes out of 9, and it received 9 votes out of 9, unanimously passed.
When was that?
That was, God, I should know that so easily, but I would say that was in April. I'm guessing it was in
Just
April.
a few months ago.
Yeah, not so long ago. There were actually back-to-back major zoning petitions that were turned into controversies, perhaps unfairly. There was this one right here, which I don't think should have been so controversial, the Forest City one. Perhaps somewhat more controversial was one down at MIT Kendall, which is on the MIT side of Main Street, where there was some modifications to the zoning. And I think there was a lot of people spoke out in favor of more housing. And ultimately a significant amount of additional housing was permitted under the process. How much of it actually gets built, we'll see, but But that was somewhat controversial. In the end, I believe that received 7 of 9 votes. It needed 6, so it passed comfortably.
The controversy was about?
Well, people made controversies. They were referring to the area of the MIT Kendall petition as the East Campus part of MIT, but they were really talking about places that have always had businesses and buildings and manufacturing and you name it have been on those parcels. Some people had the notion that it should be nothing but academic use for all of the buildings. I don't think that was realistic, especially since MIT does need something of an economic engine to support some of the major renovations they have to do on their campus in the coming years. So the idea is there would be about 4 somewhat substantial buildings that'll be more like Kendall Square, that'll just be on the other side of Main Street.
So you say, I'm trying to understand. So the buildings are
Zoning is a very esoteric matter.
right. The buildings are going to generate income for
MIT and the city.
MIT.
The city as
And
well.
the
The city
city,
will be making many millions of dollars as a result of that to support all the various programs that Cambridge likes to support.
And they will be able to. I mean, because the candidates always talk about the programs like
Right.
education
Well,
and
that's true.
affordable housing.
And you have to pay for those programs, and we do provide a lot of good human services programs in Cambridge. The eastern part of the Cambridge, I think it's very fair for people from East Cambridge to state correctly that the money that's generated from development in East Cambridge is probably what supports more of the city than the rest of the city. So I think that for some number of years, people in East Cambridge have felt that, where's our share? Where do we get something out of this? We're the ones who are okay with all this development. So where do we get our open space? Where do we get our soccer fields? Where do we get our programming? Right now, there's another big controversy right now on a building that was donated as part of the rezoning, a previous rezoning a couple of years ago, of the Alexandria properties. And it's a building called the Foundry Building. Presumably there was a foundry in there one time. I don't know the whole history. But there are many people now making a very strong case for why that should be turned into a community arts center for East Cambridge.
Mm.
And I think they make a very good argument. On the other hand, the economics of making that building handicap accessible and otherwise a serviceable city-owned building makes it a bit of a challenge. So that's right. So right now there are some city council subcommittees have been meeting, specifically focusing on what's to be done with the Foundry building, and it's not settled at all, right? But the thing is if you're a person from East Cambridge who's basically been witnessing the redevelopment of the waterfront of Kendall Square, and you see a lot of major development, all of which is good stuff happening, you probably rightfully feel that you have a good case to make for why you should be getting a community centers and arts centers.
Many of the people who live there actually products of the development? That is, they live there because new housing was built there?
Well, now that is a sensitive issue, because if you're somebody who's been born and raised in East Cambridge, and you see the new people, the new people coming in and taking jobs in Kendall Square, they all look like MIT students to you, right? So they come in with very high incomes, and they're the ones who can then put a lot of pressure on purchasing the housing. So nobody's being forced to sell, and somebody offers you $1 million for that house that you bought for $20,000 many years ago, you might just take that money, and then slowly but surely the neighborhood shifts.
Exactly.
And if you're one of the people who've been living there your whole life, and you see the whole neighborhood changing around you, it can be a very disquieting thing. So there are good people moving in, but it's not the people you were born and raised. It's not the people you grew up with. It's not the people you went to high school with. So it can be disquieting. Yeah.
But that was the developed area historically, the manufacturing center, right?
I think, it's interesting. There was a great series of books put together by the Cambridge Historic Commission, starting from the 1960s until about 1990, called The Survey of Architectural History of Cambridge. There were 5 volumes.
Oh, right.
Volume 1 was East Cambridge, and Volume 2 was Cambridgeport. I could mess these up. And there was a Mid-Cambridge one, Old Cambridge and North Cambridge. Many people think that the best history of the city of Cambridge is the old Cambridge around Harvard Square and the beautiful architecture and all the famous people, political figures or whatever. But let me tell you, the most interesting part of Cambridge is East Cambridge.
Huh.
The history of East Cambridge with the manufacturing history, the political history, the ongoing changing history of today with Kendall Square, for example, which is, I don't know whether people in East Cambridge fully embrace Kendall Square as part of East Cambridge, but I don't know where else you're going to put it on the map.
Okay.
All right. But East Cambridge, for 150 years has really been the sort of the happening place where a lot of what really makes Cambridge has really taken place. A lot of the other parts of the city were a little more stable.
Well, something happens in Harvard Square.
Something happens in Harvard Square.
Probably something happens in North Cambridge.
I'll tell you something though today, I think, and we can all sort of bemoan this now, but the Harvard Square, I came here in 1978, now it's 2013. In the 35 years I've been here, I went from being able to go up to Harvard Square and having it still feel like sort of a place where I would run into my friends and hang out and, occasionally brown bag with a few bottles of beer, to now where I feel, and I work at, part of what I do is I teach at Harvard, but I primarily teach at MIT. But now Harvard Square feels like Disneyland. It could be a tourist place anywhere else but Cambridge. Honestly, it bears almost no recognizable signs of Cambridge that I remember, except for maybe some of the buildings, the historic buildings.
There are old buildings.
Yeah.
There are some students.
There are some students, but they come and they go.
Yeah.
Well,
they always did.
Right. But if I can I can still come to Central Square, as I often like to do. I love to walk through Central Square, and I can still any day run into people I know. So I don't know whether Kendall Square has that feel, because it's a very rapidly changing place. But a lot of us still choose to think of Central Square as sort of the downtown part of the Cambridge we actually live in. I think Porter Square has a little bit of this feel, and maybe Inman Square too, where there's still enough of the old familiar, where it's a very strong likelihood you will run into your friends when you go for a walk in the square, and that's, no matter what happens in Central Square or anywhere else in Cambridge, the one thing I hope stays is that Central Square can remain a place where, and maybe even become even more of a place where you'll go to meet your friends. We need to create beautiful, magnificent places where people congregate and, where people who actually live here and not just people who come off of a tour bus will actually...
Tour buses. Well, if the tour buses came to Central Square, it would be the same.
I don't know where they put them. Honestly, I don't know if I could put my Volkswagen bus much of any place in Central Square.
Stand in lines for one restaurant.
Yeah.
But there's still some bookstores left in Harvard Square.
There is, but much less than were once there. I think once there were like 26, they say. I doubt whether we're anywhere close to 26 now.
2 or 3 now.
Probably, yeah. But the independent bookstores have been shutting down everywhere. It's not just Harvard Square, I think. So there are other issues. Again, my sort of narrow view often focuses on Central Square, just because it's close to where I live and it's what I care about.
Between Harvard and MIT.
Yeah, closer to Central than to Harvard. There are parts of what we call, it's sort of, some people you can call it's part of Central Square, not as what they call the Osborne Triangle, is the part that's bounded between Main Street, on the wedge between Main Street and Massachusetts Avenue, going down closer to around, Portland Street, closer to MIT. That whole area there is, where the candy factories are, and whatever happens, I hope they continue to make chocolate confections. Today today was butterscotch day on Main Street when I walked through. Some days it's peppermint chocolate.
It used to be,
yeah, but that's one aspect of Cambridge that I really hope stays.
That's manufacturing.
That was. Well, the thing is candy manufacturing was a huge industry, not just in Cambridge, but in this whole area. In fact, Fig Newtons were named after Newton because they were naming them after the towns around here. Huh. They still have the Tootsie Roll factory on Main Street, and they're still making peppermint patties down there. And The Schrafts factory is, I don't know if that's still the Schrafts one over in Charlestown. Novartis has taken over where the Necco factory was, right? But there's still bits and pieces of the candy industry around here, and I hope we can keep some of it around here.
So the new development is now mostly drugs?
I think
Industry?
When you
Pharmaceutical
industry, if you go more down toward Kendall Square, and there's Millennium Pharmaceuticals as part of the Forest City development right here close to Central Square. The pharmaceutical industry has definitely made a place here, to be sure. But it's a lot of people nowadays call entrepreneurial. The new entrepreneurs. I tend to think of them as sort of the spin-offs of MIT. They have found a place in Kendall Square primarily. There's the Cambridge Innovation Center where people sort of let at least small spaces. And some of the companies that become big companies actually often start as tiny little interests in places like the Cambridge Innovation Center. So the world is being created right there in Kendall Square.
So there's a lot of development of all kinds, like I said, in Kendall Square, and ideas coming from Harvard as well.
Yeah.
But the council has some role in this, and we have an election coming up.
That's right. We do have an election coming up.
So I'm wondering, how you see the council's role in the development.
I don't think
project or
the role of the council is pretty much restricted to the zoning. So they can zone for what can happen. Zoning is a very crude and imperfect instrument for determining what actually will happen. That's largely determined by the marketplace. You can say, oh, we'd love to have a particular type of industry or business here, there, or wherever, but that doesn't mean it's going to be viable. So the elected officials cannot dictate which companies will be here or what kind of specific bill. They can say what uses, they can say housing, and more there's been a very clear mandate for more housing. And hopefully in Central Square especially, there'll be even more of a mandate for finding places for a full range of housing in and around Central Square. Not just high expensive housing, but housing for everybody here. And there is still a role for the City Council to play in fashioning what may turn into some kind of a zoning per package for Central Square area.
How much new
Big
housing
issue.
will they need in order to support what's called affordable housing?
Probably a lot. But there were, based on this commission that was formed a couple of years ago, they were recommending as many as 2,200 or so units of housing should be built in Central Square. I don't know how much would actually be built or should actually be built, but I'd say something at least on the scale of 1,000 units of housing or something in and around Central Square, mainly clustered close to Mass Ave, which isn't for everybody. If you want to have a dog and and 3 kids in a swing set, maybe this isn't the place for you. But there are a lot of people for whom this would be the perfect place. So I think they should allow that, and I think that there seems to have been a willingness among City Council to, based on other zoning votes, to actually accommodate new housing growth here. Of course, if Cambridge is the only place that's actually allowing new housing growth, that's a problem. So Boston has to do it, and I always emphasize this. Boston has to promote new housing. Cambridge has to promote new housing. Somerville, Everett, you name it.
Are they not doing so?
They're actually starting to. Actually, Mayor Menino was, I think, shooting for, tens of thousands of units of housing, whether it actually happens or not. We should probably be watching the clock, though, right?
Yeah, we're getting close.
I could talk for days.
We actually have run over time.
All right. All right.
So we are off the air.
All right.
I don't know where we ran off 2 minutes ago.
All right. Don't they give you like a high sign to say when the program's on?
No, I guess not.
Okay.
Not
All right. So anyway,
So we are
if anybody's still listening, it's been a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry. I lost track.
That's okay.
Watching you instead of the clock.
All righty.
So thank you.
All right. And do I